My name is Deanna Colwell. I'm 37 years old, and I want to tell you about the night I was sitting on my couch in my work clothes at almost 10 o'clock, a half-empty glass of wine on the cushion beside me, and I opened an app on my phone that I used to find my 6-year-old's iPad between the couch cushions. And instead, I found my husband's location pin sitting 2 hours south of our house, on a rural road outside of Guntersville, Alabama, at an address I knew better than I knew my own parents' phone number, the address of my best friend's private beach house. He had told me he was meeting with a lawyer. I stared at that little blue dot for 4 seconds. Then I closed the app. Then I opened it again. The pin hadn't moved, and I sat there in the quiet of a house where my daughter was already asleep and my husband was somewhere I was never supposed to know about, and I felt the specific, terrible feeling of understanding something you have been successfully not understanding for a very long time. I'm going to tell you everything, but before I do, if you've ever had a moment like that, where your stomach knows something your brain is still trying to argue with, I think you're going to feel every word of this story. Go ahead and hit like, subscribe so you're here for all 4 parts of this, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely want to know. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the middle child of 3, in a house that ran on practicality the way some houses run on love. My dad, Ray, drove long-haul trucks. He was home 3 days out of every 14, sometimes less. My mom, Carol, worked the morning shift at a hospital cafeteria, and then came home and ran everything else. The bills, the homework, the dinners, the arguments, with the kind of quiet exhaustion that I spent most of my childhood misreading as coldness. She wasn't cold, she was just never not tired. There was love in our house, I want to be clear about that. But it came in the form of meals on the table and problems solved, not words spoken or arms around you when something fell apart. My older brother enlisted at 18 and left. My younger sister, Becca, got a scholarship to Vanderbilt and kind of left too, even though she only moved 45 minutes away. I was the one who stayed geographically closest to everything. I don't know if that was loyalty or just a failure of imagination at the time. What I knew by the time I was 12 was this: in my house, you didn't press. You didn't ask for more than what was offered. You held things very still and you managed them, and you were grateful for what was functional. That was the lesson that got quietly written into me, and I carried it out of Murfreesboro and into every room I ever walked into after that. I was the easy one, the one who didn't require much. And I thought, for a very long time, that this was a virtue. I want to stop here for a second, because if you've ever been the easy one, the one who adjusted, who accommodated, who made herself smaller so the room felt more comfortable for everyone else, I need you to know I see you. And I need you to understand that being easy and being invisible are not the same thing, even when people treat them like they are. That specific loneliness, of being overlooked precisely because you've made yourself so low maintenance, is one of the quietest kinds of pain there is. If that's already landing somewhere real for you, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Now let me keep going because this is where it starts to get complicated. I put myself through Middle Tennessee State on a partial scholarship and whatever I could make waitressing 3 nights a week at a chain restaurant on Medical Center Parkway. I graduated with a communications degree and a minor in business writing and $34,000 in federal loans that I finished paying off at 34. Not because anyone helped me, not because anything came easy, because I showed up on time for every single thing and I did not stop until it was done. I was good at my job from the start. Content strategy, messaging, knowing how to say the right thing in the right order so the person reading it feels like it was written specifically for them. There's something almost personal in it for me. I think I understand how to find the thing that needs to be said because I spent so long around people who never said the things that needed saying. I met Griffin at a colleague's backyard cookout when I was 29. He was easy to be around. That's the first thing I noticed, and the thing I have thought about the most in the months since all of this happened, because I'm not sure easy and safe are the same thing either. He was in commercial real estate, confident without being loud, the kind of man who remembers the names of everyone in the room. He was raised in Brentwood, went to Vanderbilt, actually finished, unlike Becca who'd tease me about that, and his family had money the way some families have furniture, just always there, never discussed. We got married when I was 30. Marin was born when I was 31, and for a few years, the life we had looked like the life I had been quietly building toward. The good school district, the 4-bedroom house, the Sunday dinners that actually happened. I was not naive enough to think it was perfect, but I thought it was real. Sasha came before Griffin. That's the part that matters most, I think. I met her at a communications industry networking event in Nashville when I was 26 and she was 23, and she walked up to me at the snack table and said, "I already talked to everyone interesting in this room, and you're the only one left, so you must be interesting, or I'm stuck." I laughed before I even meant to. That was Sasha. She had this way of making you feel like being chosen by her was something that happened to specific people for specific reasons, and she had figured out your reason before you had. We were close in the way that women who meet at the right moment in their lives get close. Fast and deep and a little bit reckless. We told each other things. We called each other on bad days before we called anyone else. She had this beach house on Lake Guntersville that her father had set up through a trust, and starting in our late 20s, we would go out there a few times a year, just the two of us, and it was the place where I felt most like myself. Good wine, terrible cable, the dock in the evening light. She always stocked the pantry before I arrived. I was 37 years old and sitting on my couch with my work clothes still on when I found out that my husband had been going to that place without me for 7 months. And here is the thing I have had to sit with. The thing I was not ready for when that pin appeared on my screen. It wasn't the shock I expected. It was something more like recognition, like a word you've been trying to remember suddenly appearing in your mouth. I had known something was wrong for 8 months. I had been dating it, quietly, in the back of my mind. The vague distance, the efficient dinners, the way Griffin had started leaving his wedding ring on the bathroom counter in the morning, citing a gym habit he developed right around the time everything shifted. I had known. I had just been being easy. I closed the app. I opened it again. The pin sat on that road like a fact I couldn't reorganize. And I thought about something my dad said to me once, standing at the door of our house in Murfreesboro before a long run, handing me a stuffed armadillo he'd picked up at a truck stop in Laredo. He said, "I think about you the most when I'm gone." I was 11. I kept that armadillo on my windowsill for years. It's in a box in my guest room closet now, and I have never been able to explain to anyone why I kept it, or why I never brought it out once I got married. I think I understand it now. I put my phone face down on the couch cushion. I sat in the quiet for another few minutes. Then I picked it up, opened my notes app, and I started making a list. I didn't write anything accusatory that night. I want to be clear about that. The list I made at 10:17 on a Tuesday in October was not a list of grievances. It was more like an inventory, a quiet, methodical accounting of things I had filed away under "not yet" and "maybe I'm wrong and let's not push for the better part of a year." Thursday evenings where Griffin was vague. A weekend in August where Sasha canceled our lunch 3 days in advance, and I had barely registered it, just texted back "no worries next time" the way you do when you trust someone completely. The way Sasha had started asking about Griffin in conversation, careful, specific questions dressed up as casual ones. "How's Griffin's work been? Is he traveling much?" The particular careful quality of someone performing not knowing something they already know. I wrote it all down. Not because I was building a case, because writing things down is what I do when the part of me that manages everything needs to feel like it's still in control. I filled 2 pages in my notes app. Then I put my phone on the nightstand and I lay down next to the empty side of the bed and I stared at the ceiling for a long time before I fell asleep. I did not call Griffin that night. I did not call Sasha. I did not call anyone. In the morning, I got Marin up and made her oatmeal with the brown sugar on top the way she likes it. And I drove her to school, and I watched her walk through the front door with her backpack that's slightly too big for her body, the little penguin keychain swinging off the zipper. And then I sat in the school pickup line for 11 minutes after the car ahead of me had already pulled out, just sitting there with my hands on the wheel before I made myself drive to work. I called Renata from the agency parking lot before I went inside. I sat in my car with the engine off and I called her, because Renata is the person I call when I need someone who will not manage me. She's my content director, one level above me on the org chart, and we have worked together for 4 years and developed the particular kind of honesty that only exists between people who have watched each other handle real pressure in real time. She went through her own divorce at 35. She doesn't romanticize things. She doesn't soften the parts that don't deserve softening. She answered on the second ring. I could hear her office in the background, the particular hum of the open floor plan. I said, "If I tell you something I found out last night, can you just not manage me? Can you just be honest with me?" She said, "That depends on what you found." I told her about the GPS pin. I told her the address. I told her whose address it was. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. I counted. Then she said, "Deanna, how long have you known something was wrong?" And that was the question. That was the one that got me, because I had not asked myself that question yet. I had been making lists. I had been inventorying. I had been doing everything except asking myself the plainest version of what was happening. I said, 8 months. And you didn't push. I never push. I know, she said, and then, quieter, that's the thing. I think about those 3 words a lot. That's the thing. Not an accusation, not a correction, just a recognition of the pattern, stated plainly by someone who loved me enough not to dress it up. We stayed on the phone for 22 minutes. By the end of it, I had not cried and she had not told me what to do, which is exactly why I had called her. She just said, before we hung up, "Whatever you decide to do next, do it because you know, not because you can prove it yet." That afternoon, I called Griffin at 4:30. I was at my desk, the door to my office closed, the content calendar open on my screen, so I had somewhere to look that wasn't my own reflection in the dark window. I asked him how the meeting with the lawyer had gone. He said it was fine. Progress on the contract dispute. Should be resolved by end of month. His voice was completely even, unhurried. The voice of a man who has said the same lie enough times that it no longer requires any effort. I asked what the lawyer's name was. He paused for half a second. I would not have caught it if I hadn't been listening for it. And then he said, "Mitchell. Mitchell Barnes." I said, "Okay, I'll have dinner ready around 7. After I hung up, I Googled Mitchell Barnes, attorney, Nashville. He exists. He is a real attorney at a real firm. I wrote his name down in my notes app, underneath everything else. Then I called the firm's main line. I told the receptionist I needed to verify a Thursday meeting for a contract matter with Griffin Caldwell and asked to be transferred to Mitchell Barnes's assistant. The assistant was apologetic and efficient, the tone of someone who delivers this kind of information 10 times a day. She said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Barnes is on vacation this week. He won't be back until Monday. Would you like to schedule something for next week?" I thanked her and hung up. I want you to think about what it takes to construct a lie that specific. To name a real attorney at a real firm, someone connected enough to your actual professional world that the name would hold up under casual scrutiny, but to not account for the possibility that your wife might actually call. That's not carelessness. That's the arrogance of someone who has never once been checked, who has been given every reason to believe that the person at home will not press. I have spent a lot of time since then thinking about the difference between trust and inertia. I trusted Griffin. I genuinely did. But I also wonder now how much of what I called trust was just the trained habit of a woman who grew up in a house where you didn't push, where you held things still and called it grace. Has anyone ever used your steadiness against you like that? Your reliability, your reputation for not making things difficult, turned into a door they could walk through because they knew you'd leave it unlocked. I think about that a lot. I think about all the people who are easy precisely because they were taught to be, and how that ease gets mistaken for permission. If that's hitting somewhere real for you right now, drop it in the comments. Tell me what that looked like in your life. I read every single one, and I mean that. 2 days after that phone call, Sasha called me. Not a text, a call. Friday morning, her voice bright and easy and exactly the way it always sounds, which is the part that still catches in my chest when I think about it. She was calling about the lake weekend in November, describing it the way she always does, the dock in the fall light, the good wine, just the two of us, no husbands, no children, a whole weekend of nothing useful. I was standing in my kitchen, my hand on the edge of the counter, the coffee maker still running. I said, "Just the two of us?" "Obviously," she said, "that's kind of the whole point." And her voice when she said it, warm, familiar, entirely uncomplicated, was the voice of my best friend of 11 years. The same voice that had talked me through my father's health scare, my worst quarter at work, the first month after Marin was born, when I couldn't sleep and Griffin was traveling, and I called her at 2 a.m. and she just stayed on the line. That voice, saying, "Obviously." I said, "Sounds perfect. I've been thinking about the lake a lot lately." I got off the phone and my hands were shaking. Not from anger. I want to be precise about this. From the specific physical shock of holding two incompatible realities at the same time. The Sasha I had known for 11 years, and whatever this was. I called Renata back that afternoon. I told her about the call. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I had already been thinking about this since the parking lot 2 days ago. I had been thinking about it the way I think about a campaign strategy. What do I know? What do I need to know? And what is the one move that changes the terms of everything? I said, "I'm going to go there. To the lake house. Saturday morning." Renata didn't argue. She didn't tell me to wait, to think it over, to be careful. She said, "Text me when you get there, and when you leave." I called my mom that evening and asked if she could take Marin for the weekend. I told her I had some things to sort out. My mother, being Carol Colwell, did not ask what things. She said she'd pick Marin up Saturday morning and have her back Sunday evening. I said thank you. She said of course. We hung up after 8 minutes, which was 4 minutes shorter than our usual Sunday call, which tells you something about what it costs me to ask for help even now. I packed a bag that night. Not much. A change of clothes, my phone charger, my laptop. I didn't sleep well. I lay in the dark and I thought about the key under the third deck board from the left. I thought about the burner that runs hot. I thought about the November weekend Sasha had been planning and what exactly she had been planning to tell me before it. I got up at 6:15 on Saturday morning. I made coffee. I did not make a list. I got in my car and I drove south. The drive to Guntersville is 2 hours on a good day. I took 231 south out of Nashville, and I drove with the radio off the entire way, which is something I almost never do. I need sound usually, a podcast, music, something to fill the space. But that morning, I needed to hear myself think. Or maybe I needed to hear myself not think. Just the road and the October light coming flat and gold across the fields outside of Shelbyville. The trees starting to turn, everything that particular shade of amber that makes Tennessee look like it's trying to say something it doesn't have words for. I passed the exit I used to take to my parents' house when I was in college and needed to do laundry and eat a real meal. I passed the Cracker Barrel in Manchester, where Sasha and I stopped once on the way to the lake, years ago, and she ordered pancakes and ate half of mine too, and told me about the engagement she'd broken off, the one with Philip, the man her family had approved of completely. She said she'd called it off because she realized she was performing it, that she wanted something real, not something correct. I thought about that the whole rest of the way down. I turned onto the gravel road at 8:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my phone when I made the turn, some automatic part of me still documenting, still making the invisible list. Griffin's car was there, a gray Audi sedan, parked in front of the house like it belonged there, like it had been there enough times to have a usual spot. I parked directly behind it, not beside it, behind it. I sat in my car for about 30 seconds, not hesitating. I want to be clear about that. I was not deciding whether to go in. I had decided that 2 days ago in my kitchen with my hands shaking. I was just breathing, giving myself 30 seconds to be a person before I had to be whatever came next. I got out of the car. I walked to the deck. I crouched down and I lifted the third board from the left and I took out the key. It was cold in my hand, small and ordinary and cold. I unlocked the door and I walked in. Sasha was in the kitchen, barefoot on the tile, a coffee mug held in both hands, reading something on her laptop at the kitchen island. She was wearing a pale sage green linen dress, and her hair was in a loose, low bun with pieces falling forward around her face. And the morning light was coming through the window over the sink, and she looked comfortable. She looked like someone in her own home on a quiet Saturday morning, which of course is exactly what she was. She looked up, and the expression on her face in that first second, that is the thing I have replayed more than anything else. Because it was not guilt, not exactly. It was something more layered than guilt. It was the expression of someone who has been expecting a conversation for a long time and has rehearsed many versions of it, and is now realizing that none of the versions began like this. I stood in the doorway. I did not say hello. I said, "How long?" Not a question, just the two words. She set the coffee mug down on the counter, carefully. The way you set something down when you need your hands free, but you also need a moment. She said, 7 months. I had prepared myself for a denial, for confusion performed, for a version of events I would have to argue against. I had not prepared myself for 7 months stated plainly, without flinching. And I think that the plainness of it is what finally broke something open in me that I had been holding shut since Tuesday night. 7 months. Marin had just turned 6 in March. In March, while I was organizing a birthday party with a penguin theme because Marin loves penguins, while I was ordering a cake and blowing up balloons and feeling grateful for the life I had assembled, this had already been happening for 2 months. I said, very quietly, "And you were going to invite me here in November?" "I was going to tell you before November." "When?" She didn't answer, and the silence where the answer should have been told me everything about the answer. This is the moment, right here. This is the one I come back to when I try to understand what this whole thing cost me, and I think it's the one that will stay with me the longest. Not the GPS pin, not the call to the law firm, not even what happened next. It's that silence. The silence of my best friend of 11 years, not being able to tell me when she was going to tell me. Because there was no when. There was just the ongoing calculation of what she could keep and what she could afford to lose. And I was somewhere in that math in a way I had never been asked about. If that hit you somewhere deep, if you know what it feels like to realize that someone you loved was running numbers on you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not already here. Because what happens next is the part I almost didn't have the words for, and I need you to stay with me. Griffin came out of the back bedroom. He had been in the shower. I could tell from his hair, still damp, from the fact that he was still tucking in his shirt when he stepped into the hallway. And he stopped when he saw me. He just stopped and said my name. Just my name. Deanna. Nothing else. Not, what are you doing here? Or, let me explain. Just my name, in the voice of someone who has run out of the next sentence. I looked at him for a long moment. I took in the damp hair and the shirt half tucked and the silver watch on his wrist. The one he bought himself as a closing gift on a big deal 2 years ago. The watch he wears every day. The watch he was wearing in my house 2 nights ago when he told me about a lawyer named Mitchell Barnes. Then I looked back at Sasha. I said, "Keep the November weekend. I have plans." I picked up my keys from where I had set them on the entryway table. I had put them down without realizing it, which strikes me now as the most human detail of the whole morning. The way the body just does ordinary things in extraordinary moments. And I walked back out the door. I did not look back. I want to say I did that because I was strong. The truth is, I didn't look back because I knew if I saw their faces, I would say something I hadn't decided yet whether I wanted to say. And I had promised myself going in that I would not do anything I hadn't decided. I got in my car. I pulled out from behind Griffin's Audi. I drove back down the gravel road. And I fell apart for exactly the length of the 2-lane road before it meets the highway. Maybe a mile. I cried the way you cry when you've been not crying for 4 days. Ugly and physical and without dignity. I pulled over once, just for a minute, at a farm supply store that wasn't open yet, and I sat in the parking lot and I let it happen. Then I pulled back onto the road and I kept driving. Here is what I thought about on the way home, in between the crying and the silence and the flat gold October light. I thought about Sasha at that networking event in Nashville 11 years ago, walking up to me at the snack table and saying, "You must be interesting," or "I'm stuck." I thought about how much I had loved being chosen by her, how specific and real that feeling was, how it had never once occurred to me to ask what it cost her to do the choosing. Whether she was always this person, running quiet calculations behind the warmth, or whether this was something that had grown in her over time, fed by something I hadn't seen. I don't have a clean answer to that. I have thought about it for months, and I still don't. And I think that's the part that makes her real to me in a way that's harder than anger. Anger would be simpler. What I actually feel is something more like grief for a person I may have partly invented, the Sasha I thought I knew, assembled from 11 years of real moments and real conversations and real kindness, now impossible to fully separate from this. I got home at 11:13 in the morning. The house was quiet without Marin in it. I walked through the front door and stood in the hallway for a moment, just looking at our house. The coats on the hooks by the door, Marin's rain boots on the mat, the framed print Sasha had given us as a housewarming gift hanging at the end of the hall. I took that print down. I put it in the guest room closet, next to the box with my dad's armadillo in it. Then I called Renata. She answered before the second ring and said, "Tell me," and I did. Standing in my kitchen, then sitting on the floor of my kitchen because my legs decided that was where we were doing this, I told her everything. Not managed, not categorized, just all of it, in the order it happened, including the mile of ugly crying at the farm supply store parking lot. When I finished, Renata was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need right now?" I thought about it. Not the emotional answer, I knew what that was. The other answer. The one that came from the part of me that had been making lists since Tuesday night, that had called the law firm, that had driven 2 hours south and parked directly behind my husband's car. I said, I need to talk to someone who knows what Griffin's financial exposure looks like, and I need to do it before Monday. I know someone, Renata said. Her name is Paige Doran. Paige Doran called me back at 2:17 that same Saturday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad in front of me. Actual paper, not the Notes app, because some things need to be written by hand. And when my phone rang with an unfamiliar Nashville number, I answered it on the first ring. She had a calm, unhurried voice, the kind that doesn't perform warmth but has it anyway. She asked me to tell her the situation in my own words, and I did. And she listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she asked me 4 specific questions. About the house, about Griffin's income structure, about any jointly held accounts, about whether I had any documentation of the deception. I told her about the GPS pin, the call to the law firm, the assistant who told me Mitchell Barnes was on vacation. She said, "You've already done more than most people do before they call me." We talked for 47 minutes. By the end of it, I had a Tuesday appointment at her office and a short list of documents to begin gathering over the weekend. Financial statements, account information, anything with both our names on it. I wrote everything down on the legal pad in my neat, even handwriting, the same handwriting I use to annotate client briefs. And when I hung up, I sat looking at the list for a long moment. This was real now. Not the GPS pin, not the drive to Guntersville, not even standing in that kitchen doorway. This, the legal pad with Paige Doran's name at the top and a list underneath it. I made myself a sandwich I didn't fully eat. I called my mother and talked to Marin for 10 minutes. She told me she and Grandma Carol had made biscuits, and that Grandma Carol let her put in too much butter, and it was the best thing that had ever happened. I laughed. A real one, not performed. Marin has always been able to do that to me, reach straight through whatever is happening and find the part of me that is still just her mother. After I hung up, I went to bed at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night and slept for 10 hours, which is something I have not done since before Marin was born. Griffin came home Sunday afternoon. I heard his car in the driveway, and I was in the kitchen starting dinner, pasta, simple, something to do with my hands, and I kept stirring when he came in. He set his keys on the counter. He stood in the kitchen, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who has spent the last 24 hours constructing something he hopes will hold. He said it was over with Sasha, that it had been a terrible mistake, that he did not want to lose me, did not want to lose our family, did not want to lose this, and he gestured at the kitchen, the house, the life assembled around us. He said my name the soft, careful way he used to say it when we were first married, before efficiency replaced everything. And I want to be honest with you here, because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves a clean arc. I felt the pull of it. I felt it in my chest, the gravitational pull of 7 years and a daughter and a house and the version of the future I had been building toward, the version where this didn't happen. I let him finish. I did not interrupt. I stood with the wooden spoon in my hand, and I let him say everything he had prepared. Then I said, "I made an appointment with Paige Doran. She'll be sending you some documents this week." The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever been in. Longer than the Tuesday night with the GPS pin. Longer than the drive home from Guntersville. Griffin stood in my kitchen, and something moved across his face. Hurt first, then anger, then the particular cold calculation I recognized from stories he'd told me about difficult negotiations. The face he made when the terms weren't what he expected, and he was recalibrating. He said we needed to think about what this would do to Marin. He said it in a tone calibrated to activate guilt, rather than love. I want to make that distinction clearly, because I think women, especially, are taught to receive those two things as the same, and they are not the same. Love for your child and guilt wielded as a tool are not the same thing, and the fact that I could tell the difference in that moment, standing in my own kitchen with a wooden spoon and a legal pad on the table, is maybe the thing I am most quietly proud of from this entire experience. I looked at him. I said, "I am thinking about Marin. That's why I'm doing this." He left that evening to stay at a hotel. I finished making the pasta. I made enough for two out of habit, and then stood at the stove looking at the extra portion for a moment before I put it in a container in the fridge for tomorrow's lunch. Then I sat at the table and ate alone, and it was fine. It was just dinner. The house was quiet, and I was in it, and I was fine. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way people might expect. They were mostly administrative. Paige Doran was methodical and prepared, and made me feel like I was navigating a real process rather than drowning in one. Griffin got his own attorney, a man from a firm in Brentwood, and the two attorneys began the particular formal dance of asset disclosure and custody arrangement. I went to work every day. I picked Marin up from school. I made dinner. I did the things that needed doing. I did not hear from Sasha for 6 weeks. When her message finally came, it was long, carefully written in the way that Sasha writes everything, with the particular narrative intelligence of someone who understands how to structure a story so it lands the way she wants it to land. She explained that she hadn't planned for this, that Griffin had come to her, not the other way around, that she had told herself the marriage was already over before she became part of it, that she had been planning to tell me, that she was sorry in ways she didn't have words for yet. It was, I will say, a genuinely well-written message. She knew how to say the things that would be hardest to dismiss. There were moments reading it where I felt the 11 years of real friendship pressing up against the words, recognizable and true. She wasn't performing in that message. I believe that. I read it once. I saved it in a folder in my email labeled with the date. I did not respond. Not because I was punishing her, because I had nothing to say yet that was mine rather than reactive, and I had made a decision somewhere on that drive home from Guntersville that I was done responding to things before I decided what I actually thought. I was done being easy in ways that cost me. What happened to Griffin after, I learned mostly through the professional grapevine, through a colleague who knew someone at his firm, through the careful, selective information that travels in a mid-sized city like Nashville, where everyone is 3 connections from everyone else. The contract dispute in Williamson County that he had supposedly been meeting about, it fell through. A deal he'd been building toward for 18 months unraveled in the same quarter everything else did. Not because of me, not because of anything I did, but because when a person is managing 2 lives simultaneously, they eventually stop managing both of them well. I didn't celebrate that. I want to be clear about that too. It would have been easy to feel something sharp and satisfied about it, and I would not have blamed myself for that. But what I actually felt was just tired. The specific tiredness of having spent months in proximity to someone else's consequences. Becca called me in November. My sister, who lives 45 minutes away and whom I see 4 or 5 times a year and am close to in the way of people who share a history but not a daily life. She had heard some version of things through our mother. She called and she said, "I should have been calling more. I'm sorry I wasn't." Not an explanation, not an excuse, just the specific acknowledgement of the specific absence. I told her I appreciated it. We made a dinner plan for the following week, and we actually kept it, which was new. My mother called on a Sunday, our usual 12-minute window, and at minute 9 she said, "You doing okay? Really?" And Carol Colwell asking, "Really is," that's not a small thing. That's her version of an arm around your shoulder. I said yes, and then I said, Actually, I'm doing better than okay. I think I'm figuring something out. She said, "Good." And that was it, and it was enough. In December, I wrote Sasha a letter. Not an email, a letter, on actual paper, in my handwriting. I did not send it as a response to her message. I sent it because I had finally figured out what was mine to say. I told her that I had loved her friendship for 11 years, and that most of that love was real, and I was keeping it. Not the recent part, not the version that had a secret inside it, but the part that was genuinely ours. I told her I was not interested in performing forgiveness before I had actually arrived at it. I told her I didn't know yet what I would feel about her in 5 years, and I was done making promises about my own feelings to make other people comfortable. I told her I hoped she found the real thing she was looking for. I meant it. Renata read it before I sent it. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and she read the whole thing, and when she put it down, she looked at me and said, "That's exactly who you are." I think about that sentence more than almost anything else from this whole year. Not because it was the kindest thing anyone said to me, though it was, but because of what it meant that someone could say it with confidence, that I was legible, that after everything that had been done around me and behind me and in spite of me, I was still recognizably myself. Still the person who notices everything and writes it down and does not stop until it's done. It is January now, 4 months since a Tuesday night and a blue dot on a map. Marin is at school, the house is in process, legally, practically, the slow administrative work of dividing a life that was built together. I have a good attorney and a solid plan, and a daughter who still wants her oatmeal with the brown sugar on top every morning, which turns out to be the most stabilizing fact of my daily life. This morning, I sat at my desk and I opened my notes app. The list from that first Tuesday night is still there. 2 pages of quiet inventory, the architecture of something I had known for 8 months before I let myself know it. I scrolled past it to a new note I started last week. It's shorter than my other lists. It's a list of things I'm looking forward to. Not big things. A weekend trip Renata has been planning for us in February. A content project at work that I'm genuinely excited about for the first time in a while. Teaching Marin to make biscuits. Actually make them, not just put in the butter. So she has something from her grandmother's kitchen that lives in her hands. I read it once. Then I put my phone face down on the desk. My name is Deanna Colwell. I'm 37 years old, and I finally understand that the life I was building toward was not the one I thought I was building. It was something better, and quieter, and entirely mine. It just required me to stop being easy long enough to find it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Has there ever been a moment where you already knew the truth? Where your body had already arrived at the answer, but you kept filing it away under not yet because pressing felt like too much to ask of yourself? Leave it in the comments. Tell me what that felt like and what finally made you stop looking away. I read every single one of those comments, and I mean that more than I know how to say. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button, subscribe so you're here for the next one, and share it with someone who needs to hear that trusting what you know is not the same as making trouble. It's just, finally, paying attention to yourself the way you've always paid attention to everyone else. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.